Hello and welcome to the Native American versus European Worldview video discussion feedback for your American Lit Summer online class. I'm wearing my Thoreau shirt that says "Beware of all enterprises which require new clothes," and you will be reading Thoreau soon enough, and maybe you'll figure out at that point why I like him so much. So I hope you'll pardon my informal appearance. I'm painting a fence and working on this class sort of all at the same time. I want to tell you that you've done a great job to begin on the discussion board, and I would like to provide you some more specific feedback. While it was a great start, there is room for improvement. But really, the only room for improvement is one area, and that is to make sure you cite specific examples more often to make the discussions richer and to also give everybody an opportunity to respond in different ways. So even if you kind of want to echo someone else's point about something, perhaps you can use a different example, and that would be a way to enrich the conversation. This week, I would say that Susie, Sue Galloway, Doug, Patrick, Christy, in particular, the posts that they created, the threads they created and started, that those were particularly good. And as good as they were, even Patrick's could have used a little more specific information. Some of the differences you noted between the Native Americans and the Europeans were that the Native Americans, how can I say this? Because again, Patrick referenced this, we are in sort of touchy territory, because the Native American tales are tales to explain the reason why they are on the earth and the reason why there is an earth to begin with. And every people and every culture from all over the world, from all times, have tried to figure out why in the heck are we here and how did the world get created. And a lot of times it makes sense to look to beyond ourselves. You know, Stephen mentioned the metaphorical nature of that. And, you know, I know that some people who are Christian believe in the Bible literally. And I also know that there are plenty of Christians who look at it more symbolically. So if you're someone who looks at the Bible literally, please don't be insulted by some of the comparisons that I'm going to draw. Don't mean to insult you, but I wouldn't mind you thinking a little more deeply about issues like that, and there's nothing wrong with challenging your worldview. This is an academic and a theological debate that continues today. So I hope you're not threatened by it, because one of the things I really liked about our first discussion board was the respectful tone. Even when people disagree or question each other, they did it in a respectful way. Susie, for example, questioned April and asked for some more specifics, and April tried to provide those, and so that was nice. Patrick made it clear that, you know, he has a more secular point of view, and means no offense to those who have a different point of view. And that's what being in an academic environment is all about. It's a way to expand your worldview. And so, you know, when the Christians came, or the Europeans came to North America, as Dylan noted in response to Robert, the Native Americans weren't speaking English, weren't reading and writing English, and had no access to the Bible or any other English texts. And so the striking similarities among these stories, which Sue also had brought up, have more in part to do that these are human beings who are questioning the reason why they're here on the earth. And so they hadn't read the Bible, and it is pretty amazing that that there are similarities. And again, Patrick, you know, in his, you know, secular and scientific way, you know, tried to explain why he thought that was so. But I'm with Sue that it's kind of remarkable, and I also like that it's something that can really bring people together. Now, this didn't happen when the Europeans came to the New World, to North America. You know, they had the attitude that many of you noted, that these Native Americans were just primitive, barbaric, and just kind of ridiculous. But as many of you noted, Christy noted this, and April made a lot of references to the oral tradition. It wasn't anything to really look down upon. And as a matter of fact, Sue brought this up, the oral tradition puts a lot of emphasis on the whole activity, and so the storyteller becomes important. And someone else had mentioned the mythical nature of the storyteller, and then also the audience becomes important for participation. And so it's a much more inclusive, active sort of way to keep a history alive. And I think it was Melissa who referenced that she has some Native American blood in her family, and yet they have lost that ability to keep those tales alive. So there was a lot of rich discussion around these different cultures coming together, and there were some observations made between the two cultures and how they actually had some similarities. But I thought it was important to note how in the Native American tradition, the land is very important. This was something that Radash felt strongly about, mentioned it a couple of times. But as I said before, some more examples to kind of show that. And I had picked out a couple of examples just to show you what I'm talking about, although some of you did a real good job bringing up examples. But when Radash made the point that the story centered around the land, it would have been great to say, look at the Cherokee story, and on page 42, where it talks about the buzzard, and I believe it was Dylan who had brought up the buzzard as well. Dylan did reference the buzzard in his post. When he reached the Cherokee country, he was very tired, and his wings began to flap and strike the ground, and wherever they struck the earth, there was a valley. And where they turned up again, there was a mountain. When the animals above saw this, they were afraid that the whole world would be mountains, so they called him back. But the Cherokee country remains full of mountains to this day. So that's a great example of how the stories really did center a little more around the landscape. And the stories that the Pima told, and there's an example on page 46, some of that story kind of explained the sort of arid and dry southwest landscape of the Southwest. And so on page 46, pardon my dogs, the whole slope of the world was westward. And though there were peaks rising from the slope, there were no true valleys. And all the water that fell ran away, and there was no water for the people to drink. So, Juwartamahakai, and I apologize, I'm sure I'm not pronouncing that right, sent Noe to fly around among the mountains and over the earth to cut valleys with his wings so that the water could be caught and distributed and there might be enough for the people to drink. So, and the passage kind of goes on to explain how the coyote was suckled on the land because there was no milk, and so it kind of talks about the arid landscape. And so those would have been two good examples to bring up, for example, Radash, in your great observation about how important the land was. Christy also echoed that idea, and she took it from the video, and I like that, about the stories being about the earth and from the earth. And another similarity between the Native American and the Christian viewpoint sort of there was that, the Native Americans claimed, that the earth told them these stories and that they didn't make them up. The earth told them. And if you think about it, that's very similar to the way some Christians look at the Bible, that God told us this story and we were just the conduit and wrote it down, but God told us and we didn't make it up. So, it's really interesting to note those similarities. And yet when the Europeans came to the New World, as Doug had noted quite well, it was for the purpose of putting forth their own ideas and what can they get out of it. Because again, you got to think about why were the different groups writing. These stories we read by the Native Americans were stories to help explain who they were and explain why they were and sort of to capture the essence of their being. And that's a very different purpose than to get more funding to explore some more, which is really what Christopher Columbus was doing, right? And so his purpose was different. And so even though some of you brought up the factual nature and the sort of journal writing type of writing as opposed to these oral traditions, it was Melissa who made the good point, sometimes they seem to write what they were thinking they might see when they got there, or what they were hoping was there. And I would draw attention to page 79, and this is in the Columbus narrative, where, I'm sorry, I said 79 Columbus, and it is Columbus, but it's 69. If you look on page 69, that big fat paragraph where there's a description of Hispaniola, which was Haiti and the Dominican Republic, which is current day Dominican Republic and Haiti. He said that there were many harbors on the coast, more than I'd seen in Christendom, many rivers good and large, which is marvelous. The lands are high. There are sierras and lofty mountains, and all are most beautiful in 1,000 shapes. and it's accessible and filled with trees of 1,000 kinds and tall, and the foliage, they never lose their foliage, is as green here now as it is in May in Spain, and the nightingale is singing, and other birds, 1,000 kind of different birds are all singing in the month of November, and there's honey, and there are birds and fruits and all kinds of fruits, and there are mines of metals and population without number. It is a marvel. And it goes on to talk about the gold, and the people are so easy to overcome, and the people, as a matter of fact, on page 71, they all understand one another, which is a very curious thing, on account of which I hope that their highnesses will determine upon their conversion to our holy faith, towards which they are very inclined. So not that this is a lie, but it's just that, wow, when you only get one side of the story, that's what we call propaganda. It's all about what's great about this place and nothing about what could possibly cause problems or be an issue or was not so great. So, you know, it's propaganda to get more funding, to explore more. And what better way to do that than talk about all the great riches you could get from this place and how you could take over these people and how this could become part of your empire. So, you know, I did, you know, you will see, again, there's that Native American versus Christian thing that goes on somewhat, and you'll see that in some of the other writings that you'll read a little bit later, in particular Samson Occam, who is affiliated with Dartmouth and who converted to Christianity, some think just to get funding for Native American education at Dartmouth, and there's a story there where his white buddy kind of betrayed him and ended up being the founder of Dartmouth and kind of cutting him out. And then there's a little bit from Tecumseh, which is not assigned to you, but you could read on page 463 if you're interested. And Wamsutta is a person who tried to make a speech sort of like looking at Thanksgiving as a day of mourning, because it didn't end up being such a great deal for the Native Americans when the Puritans came, and that speech was suppressed. So that's kind of interesting. It's not real long. It's not assigned either, but you could read it on page 149. So there is a tradition in American literature of the Native Americans and the Christian worldviews and how those work together. And I like Patrick's point about how religious persecution was one of the reasons the Puritans left the New World, or excuse me, left Europe. And you've been reading, I hope, some of that. And I'd just like to say that not only did they sort of look down upon the Native Americans and just simply try to convert them to their way of looking at the world, they also treated the Quakers really bad. And you have some Daniel Pastorius to read. He was one of the Quakers, and you're going to read some Elizabeth Ashbridge, and she was a Quaker. But they were really reviled by the Puritans, and you'll see in that Utopian Promise video a little bit more about that. And it's kind of interesting that the Puritans were the ones who, you know, sort of became really the people that drove the literature. And that's what we're reading now. You know, hopefully you're reading Anne Bradstreet, and there's that, you know, the flesh is bad and the spirit is good, and things of this world are sinful and things of heaven are holy. A lot of those points of view. We shall be a city upon the hill. You know, you've read Winthrop, I hope. You've read the Bradford, William Bradford stuff of Plymouth Plantation, and you're seeing some of, you know, that belief system that's so ingrained in how we look at the world, coming from that time period and from those people. So even though we've progressed a little bit beyond that, someone noted how they're glad that, you know, we can kind of be Christian and believe however we want. In other ways, we still sort of cling to some of those older ideas, and we can at least see where they came from. So I hope you'll pay attention to that. And again, when you're in a culture, it's kind of hard to see outside of your culture. Like, we can look at these Europeans coming to the New World and say how closed-minded they were, but you know, when you're sort of steeped in a particular way of looking at the world, and this is a predominantly Judeo-Christian nation in which we live, even though we have other groups of people for sure and diversity, predominantly Judeo-Christian, it's hard to sort of see outside of that. So I hope this literature, you know, doesn't in any way threaten you, but does help you kind of see the history of where we've come from, and also maybe look at some commonalities among peoples. And I really enjoyed your discussion board this week. We're coming up to the 15-minute mark, and YouTube's going to cut me off. So more examples. Keep up the nice, respectful attitude, and I can't wait to see your next discussion board. From Keller, Virginia, I'm going to say good night.